How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Daled, Daf 54 of Masechtas Zevachim. Friends, today's Daf is going to be all about the yesod of the Mizbeach. More specifically, the not yesod of the Mizbeach. The parts of the Mizbeach where there is no yesod. And why is there no yesod? And if there is no yesod, then what is there? What isn't there? So that is really the focus of a bunch of today's daf. As we've, of course, as come up several times already, that on the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach, there was no yesod. And in the southern side and in the eastern side of the Mizbeach, there was only 1 amah's worth of yesod. We're going to discuss why that is. So the first section of today's daf is why no yesod in the southeast corner. And then we will discuss what was in the south and the east sides of the Mizbeach. And finally, the location of the base hamiqdash. That will be an interesting discussion as well. So it stands to be an interesting daf. Friends, let's jump in. Friends, we're going to begin on Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis, about 8 or so lines from the bottom, where it says, my taima. We're actually kind of in the middle of a topic, I guess you could say. Usually 99+% of the time, I would say that I find some kind of place to stop. There's usually in my Gemara, there's some kind of a period or 2 dots or some kind of visual indication that, okay, it's time for a breather. And usually I'll find one of those locations in order to stop and to pick up again the next day. This time I did something that I rarely do. Usually I reserve that for when mamish, there's just no good place to stop. But I kind of stopped in the middle of a topic just because it actually shifts gears now to move into the kind of why no yesod for the southeast discussion. Basically, what the Gemara was talking about a shita, basically, where we're talking about the Korban Ola and how the Korban Ola has shtaim shein arba. We saw a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel about what exactly shtaim shein arba means. Essentially, let's just say the point was that you can't be throwing any of the blood on the southeast corner of the Mizbeach because, as we know, the Korban Ola requires the yesod of the Mizbeach, right? As it said, al Mizbeach yesod, yesod Mizbeach ha'ola, that the Ola requires yesod, and therefore the Zrikas Adam of the Korban Ola can't be on the southeast corner of the Mizbeach because there's no yesod there, to which the Gemara says, my taima. How come? Right? We talk all about how, there's yesod on the western side and the northern side, but on the eastern and southern sides, it's only an amma. Why? Why is that? So my taima, how come? The Gemara answers, Amar Belazar, says Belazar the fee, Shelo haisa bechelko shel toref. Okay. Do boop boop do. So first of all, who's the Torif? Anybody want to take a guess? Who's the Torif? The Torif is Binyamin. As the pasuk says in Parshas Vayechi, Binyamin Zev Yitrof. Baboker Yochal Ad V'la'erev Yichalik Shalom. Binyamin Ze'ev Yitrof, that Benjamin is the wolf that tears things apart. So let's actually take a look at this diagram that I have over here. So what we're looking at over here, what I've shaded in green, is the part of the Beis HaMikdash that is in the portion of Benjamin. Actually, Har HaBayis, basically where the border of Judah of the Nachla of Yehuda ended, where the border of Judah ended and that of Benjamin began, was actually on Har HaBayis. So part of Har HaBayis was in the portion of Judah, and the rest of it was in the portion of Benjamin. And what I've shown here is the parts of the Azarah and the Heichel, etc., that were, so what I've shaded in green are the parts that were in the portion of Benjamin. The parts on the bottom that are not in green were in the portion of Judah. So now, basically, the point is, and we're about to see in the Gemara why, but basically the Mizbeach, and certainly where the Zrikas Adam was going to be, was in the portion of Binyamin. It was not in the portion of Yehuda. And therefore, as I have that white arrow there pointing to the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach, right, as you can see, the ramp was on the southern side. And then, right, and so the southeastern corner was in the portion of Judah, not in the portion of Benjamin. And because the southeastern corner was not in the portion of Benjamin, there's not going to be any Zrikas Adam there. There's not going to be any Yesod over there, because the part of the Mizbeach where the Zrikas Adam was happening was going to be in the portion of the Beis Hamikdash, of the Mizbeach, that was in the portion of Benjamin. And since the southeast corner was in the portion of Judah, there's no Zrikas Adam there, and there's no Yesod there. So now, again, my time. So how come there's no Yesod in the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach? The answer is, because it was not, the southeastern corner was not in the portion of the Torah, was not in the portion of Benjamin. Dam Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, says Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Mizbeach ochel bechelko shel Yehuda ama. That the Mizbeach took up a portion of Judah, one amma. Basically, I think the point is that the yesod was a thickness of an amma, and basically that, right, the yesod on the eastern side as well, the southern side, were in the portion of Judah. Amar Levi bar Chama, Amar Reb Chama Reb Chanina, Ritzua Haisa Yotza Michalko Sheyuda v'Nichneses b'Chalko Shebenyamin. That a strip from Judah went into the portion of Binyamin, basically where that, you could see in the diagram, the shaded green area, obviously in the bottom left part, there it's not shaded because that's the portion of Judah that's kind of jutting in to the portion of Benjamin. And this was hard for Benjamin, because Benjamin wanted the entire portion of where the Mizbeach is, but he wanted all that to be part of his portion. That Benjamin was distraught about this all the time, because he wanted that the Beis Hamikdash should be in his portion. That's why the righteous Benjamin merited V'naisa ushpizochon la'Kodesh Baruch Hu, and he became the host of the Rabbanu Shalom, that the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Aron, was in his portion. Shenemar uvein kseifav shachin, that the Rabbanu Shalom dwells between his shoulders, the shoulders of Benjamin. Meisvei, however, we have a question. What's the question? Olas ha'of, ketzad haisa naisis. How did they do the olas ha'of? Let's go weiter. Ha'yamolek is rosh mimul orpa. The kohen would stick his fingernail into the back of the neck of the bird and kill it. Umavdil, and he would stick his fingernail through both the trachea and the esophagus. Umimatze dama al kir mizbeach, and he would press the blood of the bird against the wall of the mizbeach. Now, the omet lo haya la yesod, and if you're going to say that there was no yesod in the southeast corner, bavir ba'alma hu dika ovid, well then it's just in the middle of the air. Let's go weiter for a second, and then we'll explain things. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar kachisnu, that this was the deal that they made. Avira to Binyamin karkadiru, that the air space is Binyamin's and the ground is Yehuda. I'm going to drink some water. I don't expect that this made any sense to anybody, but we will explain it just now. Okay, so what does all this mean? So I have another slide over here. So what you could see going on in this slide, I have a white arrow pointing to a kohen who's standing on the sovev. Okay, so basically, added chatos. This was olas ha'of. Olas ha'of was above the chut hasikra. Of course, the chut hasikra you could see in the slide. It's the red line halfway, right, dividing the top half and the bottom half of the Mizbeach. So the kohen would walk up to the sovev, walk up the ramp up to the sovev, which is the ledge that he's standing on. And the olas ha'of, which was the blood of the olas ha'of, was above the chut hasikra. So the olas ha'of was offered in the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach, that part of the Mizbeach that has no yesod, or this is what we're kind of discussing. And what the kohen would do is he would stick his fingernail into the back of the neck of the bird. And then the next thing was that the blood of the bird would be kind of like splashed on the Mizbeach, right? First, I assume that first he would kind of spritz it around, and then he would press the remainder against the Mizbeach. Anyways, so you see when the kohen presses the neck of the bird against the Mizbeach to get out all the blood, sure, he can do that, on the ledge where he is. Basically, the point is that blood could be anywhere above the chut hasikra. Now, technically, he could bend down and press the bird against the wall of the Mizbeach by his feet, right, against the ledge. Which is because the chut hasikra is one amma below the ledge, so technically he could bend down and press the neck of the bird against the wall of the Mizbeach above the chut hasikra, but below his feet, right, in that kind of amma between where he's standing on the ledge and the chut hasikra. Now, if that's the case, and we're saying that below there's no yesod, well then where's that blood going? It's just going on the floor? So that was the question. Right? If there's a yesod there at the bottom, okay, I get it. So the blood is, assume that he presses the bird against the wall of the Mizbeach below his feet, but above the chut hasikra. So if there's a yesod at the bottom, so the blood will land on the yesod. But if there's no yesod, then where's the blood going? So again, Meisyo, we have a contradiction. Olasov, when it comes to Olasov, Ketzad Oisanai says, how was it done? Molek as Rosha Mimul Arpa. He would do Malika, he would stick his fingernail into the back of the neck of the bird, Mavdil, and he would get through both of the simanim, the trachea and the trachea and the esophagus. Umematze Dama Alkir Amizbeach, and then he would press the blood from the neck of the bird against the wall of the Mizbeach. Now, as we pointed out, that could even be below his feet, so long as it's above the chut hasikra. And if you're going to say that there was no yesod at the southeastern corner at the bottom, well then, ba'avir ba'alma udekavid, what was the pressing of the blood just in the air, and it wasn't going down to the yesod? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Eimar, I'll say, kachisnu, that this was kind of the deal in terms of Binyamin and Judah, right? Because again, we want the blood to be in Binyamin's portion, right? Because he was promised that the Mizbeach essentially would be in his portion. Okay, let's right, there was something that I wanted to say that I'll get back to in a second. But anyways, the blood would have to be in Binyamin's portion. So the deal was, Avira de Binyamin, the airspace was Benjamin's Karka de Yehuda, and the floor was Judah. So when we go back, if we go back to the previous slide, right, where we showed that the southeast corner was in Judah's portion, so the ground of the southeast portion was in Judah's portion. The ground of the southeast corner was in Judah's portion, but the air was in Benjamin's. And what they would do is there would be some, right, Rashi point says that there could be some kind of a like ledge that they made onto the Mizbeach, and to kind of catch the blood before it hits the ground, because the ground was Judah's portion. We want the blood to be in Benjamin's portion. So basically, the point is that the blood would be pressed against the Mizbeach, not at the floor, but higher up, and that would be in Benjamin's portion rather than Judah's. What I wanted to point out was that pasuk of Binyamin Zev Yitrov, Baboker Yochal Ad, Unkelus, the Targum on that pasuk, and it's about to come up in the Gemara, but the Targum on that pasuk is Be'achsante Yizbina Madbecha, that in his portion the Mizbeach will be. There's actually another gear. So actually, in the Chumash that I looked at, I imagine it's part of your Chumashim as well, it actually says something a little bit different, which is Be'achsante Yazbine Makdisha. But anyways, we'll get there with what the difference is. But anyways, let's just go with this gear that we have for now, which is Madbecha. Basically, so the point is that the Torah says that the Mizbeach will be in Benjamin's portion. So we want to make sure that any blood that's being applied to the Mizbeach is being applied in Benjamin's portion. And therefore, since the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach was not in Benjamin's portion, so therefore there would be no Zrikas Adam there. Okay. Now, frag the Gemara, Milo Avalo Yesod. Okay. What exactly does it mean that there was no yesod on the southeast corner? So, Rava says, well, literally, there was no yesod on the southeast corner. It just simply, right, it was part of the construction of the Mizbeach was that there was no yesod on the southeast corner. Levi Omer says, Levi Bedomim. Levi says, no, actually, there was a yesod around the entirety of the Mizbeach. There was a yesod around the entirety of the Mizbeach. Just that blood would not be applied to the southeastern corner of it. But there was, in fact, yesod. If you looked at the Mizbeach, it would look like there was a yesod there. Just that no blood would be applied there. Rab Metargim be'achsante yazbene madbicho. That Rav translates that pasuk that we had just talked about a minute ago, right? When it says Binyamin Zev Yitrov be'er baboker yochal ad. Rav, right, the targum that Rav has for that is ba'achsante yazbene madbicho. That in his portion will be the Mizbeach. That the Mizbeach will be in the portion of Benjamin, not in the portion of Judah. So therefore, that portion of the Azara that was in the portion of Judah, there was no Mizbeach there, and there was no Yesod there either. Levi Matagim ba'achsante yazbene makdisha, whereas Levi, the version that he has, which I believe is the version that we have in our Chumashim, is that in the portion of Benjamin would be right makom mikudash l'damim, the place that is mikudash for blood. So meaning it's not that. So there was still a yesod in Judah's portion, just that it wasn't blood-worthy. It wasn't holy enough to have any blood there, so no blood would be thrown there. But the yesod was still there, according to Levi. Tashma, come in here. Ha-yesod oy mahalich al pnei kol atzofin. That the yesod was on the entirety of the northern side, val pnei kol amayir, and the entirety of the western side. Ochel b'darim ama, and on the southern side, there was only one amma of the yesod. Amma achas uva Mizbeach, amma achas. And the eastern side also, it was merely one amma. No, so what does that mean? Sounds like Rav. Sounds like on the eastern side. The southern side, there was merely one amma. The rest, there was nothing there. It was empty, like Rav says. So my ochonami b'damim. So Levi would simply say, no. On the entirety of the southern side and the entirety of the eastern side, there was also a yesod, of course. Just that only 1 amah's worth of it was worthy for the blood of the korbanos. The rest of it, you would not have any zrikas the hadam or anything, but it was physically, there was a yesod. I'm going to drink a little more water. Okay, now, Tashma coming here. HaMizbeach aya shloshim v'shtayim ha-shloshim v'shtayim. That the Mizbeach was 32 by 32. Well, that sounds taka like Levi. It's a square. There was not like there was kind of a cutout. It's not like on the southern side and the eastern side, most of the yesod was missing. No, it was 32 by 32. All the same on all the sides. Okay, it's hard to explain this exactly, like to fit into the words, I think, but it means from the side view, it looked like it was completely square, meaning it depends which sides you are talking about, right? If you're talking about, for example, the northern side, then yeah, the northern side was 32 amos. The western side was also 32 amos. But if you're talking about the southern side or the eastern side, it was only 31 amos because the yesod was missing, and the yesod was 1 amma thick, so it was really only 31 amos, but instead of 32 amos. So I guess rather than a bird's eye view, I guess it depends if you're looking at from the side, and depending which side you're looking at, I guess it would be either 32 or 31. Tashma coming here. Nimsa poreach amma. What's that? Okay, fine. Al amma yesod val amma sove emer keneged ami sove what? Kineged amma yesod val amma sove. Who wants to explain what this means? I'm going to drink a little more water. What this means is that the Mizbeach was 32 amos. Now the ramp was also 32 amos long. So now, what would the total distance from the beginning of the ramp to the end of the Mizbeach be? Well, if the ramp is 32 amos, and the Mizbeach is 32 amos long, so 32 and 32 is 64. The problem is that the total length from beginning of the ramp to the end of the Mizbeach is actually 62. How do you figure? Why is it 62, not 64? So if you look, okay, so if we have a look at our diagram of the Mizbeach that we've seen several times, so if we were to look where I have the 2 arrows, the white arrow and the blue arrow, this of course is on the western, we're looking at the western side of the Mizbeach. Of course the ramp is on the southern side of the Mizbeach, but I'm looking at the western side just to illustrate the point. So if we look at the western side of the Mizbeach, so you'll see that there are actually 2 ledges, right? The white arrow points to the ledge of the yesod, which was a 1 amma ledge, and the blue arrow points to the edge of the soveb, which was also a 1 arrow ledge, which means that actually from where the Mizbeach starts, right, until the kind of, let's say, where the top layer of the Mizbeach starts, there's a 2 amma gap, right? Meaning when you're going up the ramp to get to the top of the Mizbeach where the fire was, so you need that to be smooth. You need to get to the top of the ramp and be able to walk directly onto the Mizbeach. But if you were to take the ramp and bring it right up to the Mizbeach, there would actually be a 2 amma gap from the top of the ramp to the top of the Mizbeach because you have the ledge of the Soveh, which was an amma, and the ledge of the Yesod, which is also an amma, and you'll have a 2 amma gap. So basically, what you needed to have was cutouts in the ramp to account for the Yesod and to account for the Soved. So what do you see? So you see that apparently, so of course the ramp is in the southern side of the Mizbeach. So apparently on the southern side of the Mizbeach, there was a Yesod on its entirety, because we're saying that the Mizbeach the ramp had to have a cutout to account for the Yesod. Now, according to Rav, there was no Yesod over there, so why do you need to have a cutout to account for it? According to Levi, Taka makes sense, right? There was Yesod on the southern side, and if we had to have a cutout in the ramp in order to be able to go over the Yesod and to go over the Soviv, so that there will be a smooth, right? There won't be any gaps between the top of the ramp and the top of the Mizbeach. Although I do think that there actually, for some reason, I do think that there actually was a little gap. I'm sure we're going to get to that. I think there actually was a slight gap between the top of the ramp and the top of the Mizbeach. Okay, now, so again, so Toshma, Nimtza Poreach al Ama Yesod, Vel Ama Soviv, that the ramp needed to have a cutout to go over the Yesod and another cutout to go over the Soviv. So Ema Kineged Ama Yesod, Ve'al Ama Soviv. No, what I'll say is that the ramp basically accounted for what the Amma of the Yesod would have been, and also it needs to have a cutout for the Sovev as well. So it's not that it's actually a cutout to go over the Yesod, but that it's that it, the reason why it's a total of 62 Amos versus 64 Amos, because it takes into the account the fact that there's the part of where the Yesod is, that it's covering that, as well as for the Sovev, but there would kind of be a smooth walk from the top of the ramp to the top of the Mizbeach. Tashman, the Tani Levi taught. How, right, so Levi taught, right, Levi of course had his own kind of like Tosefta, his own collection of brises. So Levi taught, how was the Mizbeach constructed? Mevin malbein shu 32 al 32 v'gavo amo. Okay. So what you would do is here, look at this slide over here, okay? You would bring, so what we're looking at over here is basically a mold. There's this blue kind of square mold. And what you would do is that mold was 32 amas by 32 amas. And you would take all sorts of stones and things like that, right? Because I think the puzzle is what? Avonim Shlemis, I think, right? Mizbeach Adoma Taisali. That it is a Mizbeach of earth and stones. So you would take this kind of square mold of 32 amas by 32 amas, and you would kind of fill it in with stones and things. So again, so Mevin Malbein Shu Shloshim V'Shtayim Al Shloshim V'Shtayim, you would bring this square mold that was 32 amas by 32 amas. Vigovo Amma, and it was 1 amma tall. Basically, this was going to be the yesod, the lowest level of the lowest layer of the Mizbeach. Umevi Chaluke Avonim, you would bring pieces of stones, Mifulamos, I think that means like broken stones, I think. Ben Gedolos, Ben Ketanos, big ones, small ones. Umevi Sid, Vikunya, Vizefes, and you would bring plaster and pitch, Memache, and you would melt them down, Vishofech, and pour it on it. And basically you would kind of like construct this kind of stone base. V'zeu makam yesod, and that is the bottom layer, which would be for the yesod. V'chozer maybe malbin, and now he brings another mold. Shu shloshim amma. Now this one is 30 amas. Al shloshim amma, 30 by 30. V'govo chomesh amas. Now this one, its height was 5 amas, and this would be the next section of the Mizbeach. Umevi chaluke avonim chule, and again, it would bring kind of these stones, and he would fill in the mold with these stones. V'chozer umevi malben shu chavches al chavches amas, and now you'd bring a third mold that was 28 amas by 28 amas. V'govo gimel amas, and this one was 3 amas tall. Umevi chaluke chule, and again, it would bring all these smaller kinds of stones and tar and plaster, whatever it was that he needed to, all the materials, and he would fill in the mold. And then at the top of that was where the fires of the Mizbeach would be and where the korbanos were burnt. Maybe malbein shu amal amma. And now you would bring another mold. This one was 1 amma by 1 amma. This was going to be for the horns, for the cubes at the top of the Mizbeach. at the corners. Maybe chaluki avanim, he brings these small stones. Mifulamas, ben gedolos, ben ketanas, right? All these different sizes of stones. Maybe zefes, v'kunyo, v'mach, v'shofech, and he would bring the plaster and pitch and whatever he needed, and he would construct it. V'zeo keren, and this was the horn. V'chein l'chol keren v'keren. And so he would do for each horn. So what did we see? So basically, the way that the Mizbeach was constructed was that there would be, as we saw, this 32 amma by 32 amma mold, and that was 1 amma tall. Then there would be another mold, 30 ammas by 30 ammas, and that would be put in the middle, and that was 5 ammas tall. And basically, what you have now is you now have a lower ledge, which is the yesod. You have the next section, which is 5 ammas tall, and then, so basically from the floor now, you have 1 amma of the yesod, 5 ammas of the, I believe that was that called the sovev? That was kind of the next section. On top of that was the next layer, which was 28 ammas by 28 ammas. Put on top of that was 3 ammas tall. So you have 1 amma plus 5 ammas plus 3 ammas is 9 ammas. And basically, you have 2 ledges so far. You have the ledge of the yesod and you have the ledge of the sovev. And at the top would be where the korbanos were burnt. And on each corner, there would be another mold, 1 amma by 1 amma for each of the 4 cubes at the top of the Mizbeach. So now, what's important for us is that we said that the bottom layer was simply 32 ammas by 32 ammas. It was a square. There was no cutout. It's not like the southern and eastern sides were only, partially there. Only 1 amma, but the rest was gone. No, it was a complete square. And if you're going to say, the guy is lay, and if you're going to say, well, it started as a complete square, but then they kind of cut out, then they had these cutouts. They would go 1 amma into the southern side, 1 amma into the eastern side, and cut it out. Because you didn't have the yesod for the entirety of those sides. So you just cut it off. Avanim shleimis ksiv. But the pasuk says they have to be complete stones, not stones that have been cut for the Mizbeach. So answers the Gemara, Dimachis midi mituse v'shakile. Well, what you would do is, as you can see in this diagram, right, the gold area, right, basically I just kind of created this diagram. So you have the blue mold that's 32 ammas by 32 ammas, but then they would kind of also like fill in though into the mold. Also, I have those gold inserts, so that basically when they would fill in the mold with all those stones and stuff, on the southern and the eastern sides, there would only be stones for the first amma of it. And then after it, there would be no stones because there were kind of those like placeholders where those gold kind of rectangles are. So basically the point is that in the mold, there were these kind of extra placeholders there so that on the southern and eastern sides, there wouldn't be anything for most of it, just an amma at the end of each. And if you don't say like this, meaning, and I'll prove to you that this is what they did, that they would have these kind of place holders in order to like shape things. Hadamar of Kahana. Rav Kahana says, Avonim shel kronus, that the stones of the cubes, of the horns of the Mizbeach, chalu they had like a cup in them. They were carved out. The Pasuk says, "Umalu kimizra kizavius mizbeach," that they'll be filled up like a receptacle, like the corners of the mizbeach. That the horns of the mizbeach had like a receptacle in them. So achanami avonim shleimis amrachmana. Now here also, you couldn't have taken a knife to cut out those receptacles in the horns. So the demachis midi mituse v'shakale. Rather, it must be that some kind of placeholder was put into the horns, and after all the stones were put in and everything was constructed, the placeholder was removed. Hachanami, so here also on the bottom layer of the Mizbeach, Demachis midi mituse v'shakile. Here too, there was a placeholder put into the mold where we don't want to have any yesod, and then after all the stones were put in and constructed, that placeholder was removed. Darash Ravi Darshan. Mind us, what does it mean? Vayelech David u'Shmuel vayishvu benoyos b'Rama. V'chi noyos itzarama. No, the passage says Vayelech David u'Shmuel. David and Samuel went vayishvu benoyos b'Rama, and they sat in noyos b'Rama. What's noyos b'Rama? They were sitting in Rame, which is where Shmuel hails from. And they were dealing with the Noya Shalom. They were trying to figure out where does the Beis Hamikdash, where should the Beis Hamikdash, where are we to construct the Beis Hamikdash? They said, well, we know one description about the Beis Hamikdash. One detail is to have a kamta v'alis alamakim. Wherever you're going up to the Beis Hamikdash. Which teaches that the Beis Hamikdash apparently was the highest point of Eretz Yisrael. And as Rashi points out, this isn't strictly necessary to point out right now, but Eretz Yisrael is also higher than all of the lands. So basically, they needed to find the highest point, and mistama, that is where the Beis Hamikdash would be. And they weren't exactly sure where the highest point is. I should say for Yoshua. So they said, okay, why don't we bring out the book of Joshua? The book of Joshua, about half of Sefer Yoshua is dedicated to describing Eretz Yisrael and the different ways it was, different boundaries and descriptions, and how it was divided up. Now, by all of the Shvatim, it says Vayered Hagvul V'Sar Hagvul, that the border went down and extended. But when it comes to Binyamin, Va'alaksiv Vayered Loksiv. However, they noticed that when it comes to the Nachla, the inheritance of the portion of Benjamin, it only talks about it going up. It doesn't say anything about it going down. So they said, okay, it seems that we must have found what we're looking for. The Beis Hamikdash must be in the portion of Benjamin. So they said, okay, well, probably where the Beis Hamikdash needs to be built is in a place called Ein Etom, because that was really high up. Amri Nitze Bei Kolil Kidichsiv Ubein Kseifav Shochin. But then they said, maybe not quite all the way up at Ein Etom, because the pasuk says Uvein Kseifav Shochin, that the Rabbani Shalom dwells between the shoulders of Benjamin, not at the top of his head. So let's lower it a shtickle. Alternatively, Gemiri de Sanhedrin bechelko de Yehuda v'shchina bechelko de Binyamin. That they said, well, we know that the Sanhedrin is in the portion of Judah. Right? It says Mechokek. What is it? Lo Yosser Shevet mi Yehuda Mechokek mi bein Ragav. Was that what it was? Let's see. Do I see the pasuk quickly? I don't know. Anyways, so the Sanhedrin was in the portion of Judah, and it was also on Har Habayis. But the divine presence was in the portion of Benjamin. Now, if we construct the Beis Hamikdash all the way up by Ein Etam, Mispleg Tuva, it's going to be too far away from the portion of Judah where the Sanhedrin needs to be. So Mutav de Nitze Bei Porta. So let us lower it down a bit. Kidichsiv uvein kseifav shochen, as it says, and that the Rabbani Shalom dwells by the shoulders of Benjamin. Valdovers and Iskane Doyeg Ha'adomi Beduvid, and it was for this reason that Doyeg Ha'adomi got jealous of King David, that King David figured out where the discovered where the temple was meant to be. The Pasuk says, "Ki kinas beischa achalosni," that jealousy of your house, and like the Beis Hamikdash that you determined where the Beis Hamikdash was to be built, achalosni, consumed me. And the Pasuk says, "Zochar Hashem leDavid eis kol unus what's that word? Where is this? Is unoso. Zochar Hashem David eis kol unoso. God, remember for David all of his affliction. Asher nishba Hashem, that he swore to God. Im ovo be'oil beisi. Im etin shnas le'enai. Le'afa by tnuma. Ad emtza makom la'Hashem. That I won't go to my home or have any sleep until I find a place for God. Hinesh mainua be'efrasa. We have heard about in Efrat. Mitzanua b'steya'ar be'efrasa ze Yoshua. The custom Ephraim, when it says be'efrasa, that's a reference to Yoshua, that they referenced the book of Joshua to determine where the temple was to be built. Mitzanua b'steya'ar ze Binyamin dichsib Binyamin ze Yitrof. And when it says Mitzanua b'yar, that's a reference to Benjamin, about whom it says that he is a wolf, and wolves are out in the forests. Friends, that was Daf Nun Daled of Masechta Zevachim. On Daf Nun Daled of Masechta Zevachim, we learned about why there was no yesod for the southeast corner of the Mizbeach. The answer was because the southeast corner of the Mizbeach was not in the portion of Binyamin, it was in the portion of Yehuda. And it says about the portion of Binyamin that that the Mizbeach will be built in his portion, and since the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach was in Judah's portion, therefore there was no yesod there, and none of the blood would be poured there. We then discuss what was in the south and the east, right? If there was no yesod there, then what exactly did it look like? So Rav says nothing was there, right? As we saw, there was like a certain mold that would be built for the yesod, and there would be kind of placeholders there, so that there wouldn't actually be any stones in that area. Levi says there was a yesod, it just wasn't used. There was a complete square. There was yesod around the Mizbeach, but no blood was poured there. Finally, we discussed the location of the Beis Hamikdash, that it was in the portion of Benjamin, and they were trying to figure out, should it be in the highest point? Eventually, they settled that Ben Kseifa of Shoched, that God is in the between the shoulders of Benjamin, not quite at the top of his head, but a little bit further down, and that was a good solution because that would also enable it to be right next to the portion of Judah, so you can have the Sanhedrin there as well on Har Habayis. Friends, that was the Daf Nun Daled of Masechta Zevachim. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.